Once upon a time, in a quiet neighborhood, there lived a man named Mr. Harris. He was known throughout the community for one thing: complaining about his neighbor, Mrs. Mitchell. It seemed that not a day went by without Mr. Harris grumbling about the incessant noise that emanated from the neighboring house. Mrs. Mitchell, a kind-hearted and soft-spoken woman, had taken up playing the violin as a hobby. Little did Mr. Harris know that her practice sessions were in preparation for a charity event to raise funds for the local orphanage. Every evening, he would scowl and bang on the wall, demanding silence. One sunny afternoon, as Mr. Harris was returning from the store, he heard the sweet sound of violin music drifting through the air. Curious, he followed the melody to Mrs. Mitchell's house and peered through the window. There, he saw her, lost in her music, pouring her heart and soul into the violin. Mr. Harris watched as Mrs. Mitchell played with passion and dedication. Her fingers danced gracefully across the strings, producing a melody that was nothing short of enchanting. It was then that he noticed a poster on her wall, announcing a charity concert for the orphanage just a week away. A sudden realization washed over Mr. Harris. He had been quick to judge and had never bothered to understand the reason behind the music. Mrs. Mitchell wasn't making noise. She was creating something beautiful to help those in need. Filled with guilt and regret, Mr. Harris decided to approach Mrs. Mitchell and offer his help in any way he could. He knocked on her door, and when she opened, he apologized for his behavior over the past months. Tears welled up in Mrs. Mitchell's eyes as she forgave him, and they began talking. Mr. Harris learned about her passion for music and her desire to make a difference in the lives of the orphan children. He offered to help her with the charity event, and they started working together to organize a successful concert. As the charity event approached, the neighborhood buzzed with excitement. It was a night filled with beautiful music and generous hearts. The concert was a resounding success, and it raised more funds than anyone had expected. But the greatest transformation occurred within Mr. Harris. He went from being the complaining neighbor to Mrs. Mitchell's most ardent supporter. He realized that his hasty judgments had prevented him from seeing the beauty and goodness in others. In the end, Mr. Harris learned a valuable lesson: never judge others without understanding their circumstances. Gratitude and understanding can bring harmony into our lives, just as Mrs. Mitchell's music had brought harmony to their neighborhood. From that day forward, Mr. Harris not only appreciated the melodies that flowed from Mrs. Mitchell's violin but also cherished the friendship they had built. Their once tense relationship had transformed into one filled with gratitude and harmony, all because Mr. Harris had taken the time to understand and appreciate the circumstances of his neighbor's heart.